mystery of the real truth, and we bring you the real truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in regards to biblical scripture.
Hello and welcome. We found this in the public domain, public access. No copyright infringement was intended. This is titled Joseph Smith and the Beginning of Mormonism. Richard L. Bushman, the author. Joseph Smith and the Beginnings of Mormonism by author Richard L. Bushman. The core of Mormon belief was a conviction about actual events. The test of faith was not adherence to a certain confession of faith, but belief that Christ was resurrected, that Joseph Smith saw God, that the Book of Mormon was true history. Well, that could be a fable or a myth or a complete lie if he claimed that he saw God, because in the scriptures it says no man hath seen God. Moses, etc., could not look upon the face of God face to face. They would die on the spot. Just be aware of that one. We have seen a picture of depicting Joseph Smith seeing both God and the Christ. No way. We don't believe that. So he supposedly saw God and Jesus. That the Book of Mormon was true history, and that Peter, James and John restored the apostleship to who? To Mormonism? To Latter-day Saints? Don't think so. Mormonism was history, not philosophy. Where's the evidence that they restored the apostleship to this founder, Joseph Smith? It is as history that Richard L. Bushman analyzes the emergence of Mormonism in the early 19th century. Bushman, however, brings to a study a unique set of credentials. He is both a prize-winning historian and a faithful member of the Latter-day Saints Church, for Mormons and non-Mormons alike. Then, his book provides a very special perspective on an endlessly fascinating subject. Building upon previous accounts and incorporating recently discovered contemporary sources, Bushman focuses on the first 25 years of Joseph Smith's life. Up to his move to Kirtland, Ohio, USA in 1831. Bushman shows how the rural Yankee culture of New England and New York, especially evangelical revivalism, Christian rationalism and folk magic, both influenced and hindered the formation of Smith's new religion. Mormonism, Bushman argues, must be seen not only as the product of this culture, but also as an independent creation based on the revelations of its charismatic leader, or Joseph Smith. In the final analysis, it was Smith's ability to breathe new life into the ancient sacred stories and to make a sacred story out of his own life, which accounted for his own extraordinary influence. By presenting Smith and his revelations as they were viewed by the early Mormons themselves, Bushman leads us to a deeper understanding of their faith. Richard L. Bushman was a native of Salt Lake City, professor of history at the University of Delaware, USA, and had previously taught at Harvard, Brigham Young, Brown and Boston universities, widely published in both Mormon and non-Mormon journals. He's winner of several awards. You go right to the end, to the back jacket. See if there's any more information on there. Okay, we actually have Wikipedia here, where it says that he served the president of the Mormon History Association, he was honoured at the January 2011 annual meeting of the American Historical Association, where a breakout session entitled A Retrospective on the Scholarship of Richard Bushman was held. He attended. So he made a name for himself in the LDS and possibly outside it. Didn't see any more information. We'll back check it. Maybe it's on the back of the book. Have a look. See if we can see if it's in the back of the book. Here we go. Here it is. He received the Bancroft and Phi Alpha Theatre prizes from Puritan to Yankee character and the social order in Connecticut, 1690 to 1760. And editor of the Great Awakening documents on the revival of religion, 1740 to 1745, and uprooted American essays to honor Oscar Hamlin. And another important book on Mormon history from Illinois, Mormonism, the Story of a New Religious Tradition by Jan Ships. Ships has written a meditation that sheds a marvelous light on Mormonism. Insiders will applaud her explication, written in terms both lay readers and scholars alike can understand. And will say with this particular person, this is what I have always believed but was not articulate enough to convey to outsiders. And outsiders will welcome this fascinating study of a fast-growing church whose faith, intertwined with its corporate structure, has never been more tellingly delineated. Mary L. Bradford, past editor of Dialogue, a Journal of Mormon Thought, 1985, 205 pages. We actually came across a YouTube video where the Mormons were going into these Arab nations and talking with people about the Christ, the LDS, Mormon Church, etc. And they got a pretty good reception. Okay, here is the contents page. It was a live session, a meeting basically with all these people, and they were saying they went into these different Arab nations and talking to these Muslims, etc., and they're getting a pretty good response. We don't know if that's true, but if it is, wow. There's acknowledgements from this particular author to others. The introduction. In the first stages of composition, this book was titled The Origins of Mormonism. The word origins was dropped when the actual complexities of identifying the sources of Mormon belief and experience buried themselves. An attempt to trace all the images, ideas, languages and emotional structure of a movement as elaborate as Mormonism became more evidently elusive and futile as the work went on. The word beginnings in the title signifies a more modest purpose to narrate what happened as Mormonism came into being in the early 19th century. The problem of Joseph Smith's visions complicates even this simplified undertaking. Believing Mormons, like the author, understand the origins of the Book of Mormon quite differently from others. How can a description of Joseph Smith's revelations accommodate a Mormon's perception of events and still make sense to a general audience? The author's method has been to relate events as the participants themselves experience them, using their own words where possible. Insofar as the revelations were a reality to them, the author has treated them as real in this narrative. General readers will surely be left with questions about the meaning of these experiences, but at least they will have an understanding of how early Mormons perceived the world. The author has not attempted an all-encompassing social or cultural analysis. Explication of the cultural influences on Joseph Smith has been limited to demonstrable connections between his writings and beliefs and the culture of his immediate society. Abstract relationships with Puritanism and Romanticism, might be Romanticism, for example, though significant from some perspectives, have been subordinated to the influences that are known to have played upon him through actual persons in the villages where he lived. Mormonism, it must be remembered, began with one family, the family of Joseph Smith Sr. and Lucy Mack Smith of Vermont and New York. Joseph Smith Jr., the fourth child among 9, became the prophet and first elder of the Church of Christ when it was organised on April. So, did he come up with the idea first, or did the family? We believe that he did. So he's got to keep checking that anyway. So on April 6, 1830, but 3 of the 6 original organisers were Smiths, just as previously 3 of the 8 witnesses to the golden plates were family members. Young Joseph Smith's culture was predominantly family culture, so far as the record shows. He had little schooling until he was past 20. The necessity of work of the family farm kept him at home, where someone, probably his father, at one time a school teacher, taught the children. Nor is there a record of church attendance until religious excitement stirred the neighbourhood in his early teen years. As a boy and youth, Joseph was almost entirely under the influence of his family and a small circle of acquaintances in the villages of Palmyra and Manchester, New York. On both the mother's and father's sides, family culture had borne the strains of migration for 2 generations. Joseph Smith's grandparents were among the large number of migrant pioneers who left the fringe of settlements along the New England coast after the middle of the 18th century to clear farms in the heavily forested interior. After a century of relative stability in New England's population, a combination of crowding and better opportunities propelled many young men west and north in search of new land in the 1760s. Solomon Mack, Lucy Smith's father, left Lyme at the mouth of the Connecticut River for New Hampshire and northern Massachusetts in the 1700s. S.A.L. Smith, Joseph Smith Jr.'s paternal grandfather, moved from Topsfield, Massachusetts, just north of Salem, to New Hampshire and later to Vermont. Joseph Smith's parents, Joseph Smith Sr. and Lucy Mack, met and married in Tunbridge, Vermont. When the Smiths moved to Palmyra, New York in 1816, they chose an area settled for 25 years but still heavily forested. Young Joseph spent his teenage years cutting trees, burning brush and ploughing virgin soil. In a newspaper interview in 1843, Joseph said that when he became confused about the churches as a boy, he chose a place in the woods where his father had a clearing and went to the stump where I had stuck my axe when I had quit work, and I kneeled down and prayed. The removal from old settlements to new ones separated the Smiths and the Macks from the religion of their fathers. Most 18th century New England towns had one dominant church, Congregational, still deeply imbued with Calvinist theology and committed to strict church discipline. As new parishes grew on the town periphery, they modelled themselves after the patent church, or the parent church. Only a sprinkling of Baptists, Quakers and Anglicans here and there interrupted the basic uniformity of belief and practice. Migration, war and economic adversity detached Joseph Smith's ancestors from Congregationalism. Solomon Mack, an indentured servant from age 4 to 21, learned no religion from his master and lived without religion until age 75, when he was at last converted. His wife, the daughter of a deacon in the Congregational Church, taught her children to worship, but apparently without formal church connections. Her daughter Lucy was not baptized as a child and joined no church until she finally became a Presbyterian in Palmyra around 1820. On Joseph Smith's senior side, S.A.L. Smith became a Universalist, a believer in salvation for all and they were associated with the Congregational Church from time to time, always dissented from its theology. His son Joseph Smith Sr., though privately religious, attended church only sporadically. The Smiths were religious without being church people. Lucy Smith solemnly promised to serve God with all her heart when an illness brought her close to death in 1803, and then was unable to find a pastor to serve her. She at last persuaded a minister to baptize her without requiring church membership. For 70 years she read the Bible and prayed with her family before becoming a Presbyterian. Although averse to ministers and churches, Joseph Smith Sr. had 7 inspirational dreams over a span of years, all exhibiting a desire for belief, healing and direction, all showing dissatisfaction with religion as it existed. The multiplication of denominations complicated the problem. There were 5 churches vying for members in Palmyra in 1820, in contrast to the traditional uniformity in New England towns. To Smith's eyes, the religious world was in turmoil, marred by hypocrisy and corruption, far removed from the purity and simplicity of the Bible. In its precarious descent to Joseph Smith Jr., the Calvinism of his forefathers lost its strength. As L. Smith's universalism was explicitly heterodox, and all along the line Calvinist belief was diluted by Joseph Smith's generation. The family could scarcely connect with mainstream Protestantism, which in the 19th century was absorbed with evangelical revivalism. Revivalism depended on a Calvinist sense of alienation from God and the belief that grace alone could redeem people. Without the theological foundation, the Smiths could not respond and were destined to live along the margins of evangelical religion. On the strength of revival conversions, the Baptists and the Methodists grew from tiny minorities in 1780 to the most populous Protestant churches in 1850. Congregationalists and Presbyterians were not far behind. Every major city and almost every rural town saw not just one revival, but a succession of them in the decades after 1800. No Smiths of Joseph Sr.'s family were converted. Solomon Mack underwent a classic spiritual rebirth in Vermont in 1811, and for a time Lucy and Joseph attended meetings, but Joseph Sr. soon withdrew and Lucy did not persist. Lucy and 3 of the children were sufficiently caught up in the revival in 1820 to join the Presbyterians, but none mentioned conversion in the usual sense. Joseph Smith Jr. complained that he wanted to get religion too, wanted to feel and shout like the rest, but couldn't feel nothing. He could feel nothing. Aspects of the first vision resembled a conversion experience, the forgiveness of sins and the joy and elation afterward, and Joseph may have first interpreted the experience as conversion, but in later accounts the conversionist elements faded in the telling, and the opening of a new dispensation overshadowed all else. After the church was organized in 1830, evangelical revivalism had no place in Mormon worship. Mormon theology, as it developed in the Revelations and in discourses, showed few signs of having wrestled free of Calvinism. A common biblicism united Mormonism and Calvinism, but Calvinism did not establish the framework for Joseph Smith's thought. The Smiths were more directly affected by Enlightenment skepticism than by Calvinist evangelicalism. Skepticism had influence within the family itself and figured still more largely in the village through newspaper editors and other local intellectuals. As a percentage of the population, free thinkers and deists were rare in America, but skeptical attitudes cast a long shadow. In 1828, Robert Owen, the atheistic founder of the unsuccessful Utopian community at New Harmony, Indiana, offered to debate anyone on the proposition that religion was found on ignorance and was the chief source of human misery. Alexander Campbell, the leading spirit in the incipient Disciples of Christ movement, agreed to meet Owen in a Methodist meeting house in Cincinnati. For 8 days in April they debated. Campbell's concluding speech took 12 hours. Through all 15 sessions, the meeting house with seating for 1,000 was filled to capacity. On the last day, Campbell called for a standing vote of those favourable and those opposed to Christianity. Only 3 listeners stood against Christianity. The vote probably represented the distribution of sentiment in the country. Few Americans were infidels, but the full house day after day spoke for their fascination with scepticism. Moreover, both contenders made their arguments on the basis of reason. Campbell attempted to prove the hard evidence, while it tested miracles, supported Christian belief. His mode of defence illustrated how faith as well as doubt had embraced the Enlightenment by the beginning of the 19th century. Christianity claimed to be as reasonable by Enlightenment standards as science or philosophy. All of this affected Joseph Smith when he told his family and friends about Moroni and the gold plates. The reaction was quite confused. The price Christianity had paid for assimilating the Enlightenment was to forego belief in all supernatural happenings, except the well-attested events of the Bible. Witchcraft, dreams, revelations, even healings were thrown indiscriminately on the scrap heap of superstition. While in 1692, Cotton Mather, the leading intellectual of his day, could discourse learnedly on the manifestation of witchcraft, no leading divine 50 years later would countenance such talk. The Enlightenment drained Christianity of its belief in the miraculous, except for Bible miracles. Everything else was attributed to ignorant credulity. Joseph Smith's story, when it came to become known, was immediately identified as one more example. A movement among the intellectual elite, of course, could not entirely suppress popular belief in divine and satanic forces affecting everyday life. Common people, surreptitiously, to some extent, still entertain traditional beliefs in water witching and in spells to locate hidden treasure. Many more yearned for a return of the miraculous powers of the original Christian Church. A group of practitioners of traditional magic in Palmyra thus reacted quite differently from the newspaper editors to Joseph's story of the golden plates and a protecting angel. They saw Joseph Smith as one of them, tried to absorb him into their company, and grew angry when he drew back. Joseph was assaulted from two sides in the struggle between modern rationalism and traditional supernaturalism. He had to answer to demands for proof from the newspaper editors and ministers on the one hand, and extricate himself from the schemes of the Palmyra magicians and money diggers on the other. At times his closest followers and his own family were confused. One of Joseph Smith's tasks in the years before 1830 was to define his calling and mission, so as not to be misunderstood, and to set his own course apart from rationalism or superstition. The perspective of this work is that Joseph Smith is best understood as a person who outgrew his culture. The usual purpose of historical analysis is to depict persons and ideas as the sum total of the historical forces acting on them. Mormonism has customarily been seen as the product of the culture emanating from upstate New York and Puritan Yankee New England. The shortcoming of this form of analysis is that it exaggerates similarities and suppresses differences. Everything in Mormonism that resembles the local culture assumes importance, and everything unusual fades into insignificance. The original and innovative, a great deal of what is most interesting, are obscured. The viewpoint of this book is that parts of early Mormonism did resemble aspects of the environment, other parts were alien and peculiar in some passages. The Book of Mormon and the Book of Moses appeared to come from another world entirely. Single-minded attribution of these works to upstate New York culture blinds us to many of their most interesting qualities. We can understand Mormonism better if it is seen as an independent creation drawing from its environment, but also struggling against American culture in an effort to realize itself. Joseph Smith astounded and offended the people of Palmyra. His achievements, even before he left New York, were hardly what they expected from the son of Lucy and Joseph Smith Sr., when he was just 24. He organised a church, published a large and complex book of sacred writings, and began to teach a Christian gospel familiar yet strange. All this is more than could be attributed to their own small town rural culture. Mormonism appeared to be, as the scripture said, a stone cut out of the mountain without hands. The aim of this volume is to recognise the unusual as well as the common in Joseph Smith's early work, to tell how Mormonism unloosed itself from its immediate locale in those critical first years, and to portray and as accurately as possible what it had become by the time the prophet, his family and his followers left New York for Ohio early in 1831. And talks about the Joseph Smith family. Lucy Max Smith bade farewell to her sons Hiram and Joseph a few days after their deaths in Carthage in June 1844. William Richards had brought the bodies back to Nauvoo, and after the corpses were washed and dressed in burial clothes, the Smith family was admitted to the room. I had for a long time braced every nerve, Lucy wrote, roused every energy of my soul and called upon God to strengthen me. But when I entered the room and saw my murdered sons extended both at once before my eyes, and heard the sobs and groans of my family, and the cries of father, husband, brothers from the lips of their wives, children, brothers and sisters, it was too much. I sank back, crying to the Lord in the agony of my soul, my God, why hast thou forsaken this family?